The lie behind July 4th. Everything you know about July 4th is a lie. Nobody signed anything that day. The document you picture with 56 men lined up with quills in hand didn't happen. Not like that anyway. The truth is a lot messier. It's a story about men who despised each other, who skipped meetings, who were drowning in debt, and who on the day they declared independence had no idea if they'd still be alive a year later. Because if they lost this war, there is no fine waiting for them. There was a noose. And here's the strangest part. The date you celebrate every year isn't even the day independence was actually voted on. Let's see what really happened. Act 1, the powder keg. Forget the story about taxes on tea. That's the version for a 4th grade textbook. The reality is, in the 1770s, the American colonies were the most profitable jewel in the British Empire. Trade, land, raw materials, all of it flowed straight to London. The problem was, England had just crawled out of a massive war, drowning in debt, and someone had to foot the bill. The Crown looked at the colonies and said, "You will," but it wasn't just about money, it was about control. The British Parliament was passing laws over the colonists' heads, with zero say from the people who had to live under them. No representation, full taxation. American merchants, the ones making serious money off smuggling and free trade, suddenly watched their profits get sliced up by acts signed 9,000 kilometers away. So this wasn't some uprising of poor farmers. It was largely led by wealthy men, planters, lawyers, merchants, who had enormous amounts to lose under British control and enormous amounts to gain if they broke free. The tension built for years. Boston was on fire, militias were organizing, and by the summer of 1776, 13 colonies who barely tolerated one another had to decide: stay loyal to a crown that was bleeding them dry, or gamble everything on a bet nobody knew they could win. What happened inside that sealed room in Philadelphia is far more tense than you'd think. Act 2, the drama behind closed doors. Summer 1776, Philadelphia, hot, humid, swarming with flies. Inside a building with the windows shut so nobody outside could listen in, 50-some men are arguing over the life and death of an entire continent. Thomas Jefferson gets handed the job of writing the Declaration. He's 33. He's not the leader of the group, not even the most respected speaker in the room. He's just the one who writes best. He locks himself in his rented room and writes at an almost desperate pace, because time is running out and the British aren't waiting. But his text doesn't survive intact. The Continental Congress cuts almost a quarter of it. Among the passages removed, one of the harshest, where Jefferson condemned slavery and the slave trade, it got cut. Why? Because delegates from South Carolina and Georgia threatened to walk if it stayed in. Sit with that for a second. The founding document of American liberty was censored to keep men who profited from slavery at the table. And here's the part nobody tells you in school. On July 4th, 1776, Congress didn't sign anything. That day, they only voted on the final wording of the Declaration. Independence itself had already been voted on 2 days earlier, on July 2nd. The actual signing, the one on the parchment you see in museums, most delegates didn't put their names on it until August 19th, over a month later. And every name on that page was essentially a signature on their own death warrant. Treason against the crown was punished by hanging, not figuratively, literally. John Hancock signed in giant letters, the legend goes, so King George could read it without his glasses. Funny, sure, but underneath that joke was a terrifying certainty. If they lost, every family of every signer risked losing everything: their wealth, their homes, sometimes their children's lives. Some delegates actually paid that price. Homes burned down, families forced to flee, fortunes seized by British troops. And through all of it, the Continental Army, led by a George Washington who was constantly one step from disaster, kept losing battle after battle that summer. There was no logical reason to believe this declaration would hold up. It was a desperate gamble made by men who knew exactly how much they stood to lose. That's what real courage looks like, not like in the movies, like a page signed with a shaking hand, knowing exactly what might come next. Act 3: The Birth of a Myth and the Empire of Entertainment. So here's the question: how did we go from men risking the gallows to someone tossing a hot dog on a grill and lighting fireworks bought from a parking lot? In the early years, July 4th was celebrated mostly locally: patriotic speeches, processions, cannons fired off in town squares. It was a political holiday, almost solemn, meant to remind people what freedom had actually cost. It wasn't until the following century that the holiday gradually shifted into something closer to what we see today: public parties, parades, shared meals. And as America industrialized, July 4th became fertile ground for commerce. Fireworks makers, food companies, drink companies, all of them saw a guaranteed national day off and built a massive industry on top of it. Today, American spending on fireworks, food, and July 4th parties alone hits billions of dollars in a single summer day. The irony: the bigger the celebration got, the more the real story behind it faded. Few people know about Jefferson's cut paragraph. Few know the date on the parchment doesn't match the day we actually celebrate. What's left is the simple, safe image packaged neatly for mass consumption. A risky rebellion turned into a national brand. A life or death gamble turned into a barbecue weekend. So maybe that's the most American transformation of all: taking a moment of desperate courage and turning it over time into a sales pitch. But if you actually want to understand what you're celebrating on July 4th, don't look at the fireworks. Look at a group of men who put their own risk of death down on paper for nothing more than an idea. If this story just changed how you see something you thought you already knew, I've got another episode that takes apart a different historical myth almost everyone believes.